welcome to the Discipleship for the Decades podcast. I'm Jeremy, your host, and welcome to episode number 6. We're glad to have you. Obviously, you're probably either listening on your favorite podcast app, or you can also watch the recording on our YouTube page. Just search Bethel Church, LKN, and you can see us as well as hear us that way. We're just so glad to have you. Today, we are joined by our guest, Amy Petrenko. Amy is a realtor, which is kind of why she's here, bringing some of that expertise and showing where realty and kind of her faith come together. But she's also a covenant partner here, a deacon on the communications committee. There's probably other things I could say about you, but
well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so glad to have you. And Vic, her husband, we'll mention Vic, who's off to the side watching. So those two are just some great folks that we have here at Bethel. And so obviously you've come to know her, our other host here, Reverend Karis Kemp. Hello again.
Hello. So good to be with both of you. And obviously our sermon series has been around make this place your home. So who better to talk to than a real estate agent, I think, who's in our midst, who is somebody who is called to that. But before we even go there, because that's where we're going, I want to tie us in and allude to the sermon on Sunday a little bit by asking a question of both of you. Do you have any house rules that you want to reveal to us? And I will start because it's only fair, right? The two rules that I think the Kemp household that are distinctive to us is, one, the dog has to stay on the floor. We also try to keep her out of the kitchen to limited success in that realm, but stays on the floor, not on the furniture. And then often we do shoes off in our household. So, but not with guests. Like, we would not impose that on you if you're coming to visit.
Because we've been and we've had our shoes on.
No,
so
that's an unspoken house rule for the people in the house, but not for the guests. So there are house rules like that, right? Some for us and some for the guests. Anyway, Amy, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Jeremy.
So when I was thinking about what my house rules were, I realized that most of mine are probably implied or modeled without having said anything.
Okay.
So one of the first ones was, as thinking back to when my kids were at home, we would always try to teach them that they had to know that God loved them unconditionally. So that wasn't necessarily a house rule, but they had to know that even if I was upset with them, God still loved them and I still love them. So I wanted to just express that. One of the other things that I remember, again, implying to our children and teaching them, modeling it, was that it's better to tell the truth immediately because bad news does not get better with time. So I'm sure my kids would laugh at that one, but they know that that's definitely what you're going to do, or you're going to be sitting in the corner when they were little.
Bad news does not get better with time. Those
are words to live by regardless of your age.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good ones.
So I have more, but I'm curious as to what Jeremy's were.
Let's hear Jeremy.
Well, I mentioned this to the staff recently. This is a relatively new house rule. Anne's going to laugh when she hears this. But if the clothes are not in the hamper, they do not get washed. And if you know Anne, you know that rule doesn't necessarily apply to her. But we are attempting, I'm attempting to be a little bit neater in our house. So that forced us to get all those clothes off of the floor and into the hamper. That's one. We would love to have rules where the dog's concerned, but she just kind of takes over.
Clementine has no bounds.
No bounds. Absolutely no. She is spoiled rotten. So no rules where the dog's concerned. But.
Well, hopefully none of those rules frighten you from visiting us in our homes someday. I will not make you take your shoes off when you come to the Kemp house. The thing that struck us as we were just talking before the podcast a little bit was those unspoken house rules. And I did not appreciate that. As a realtor, there are things that you cannot speak about. So you need to pull out information, some of those unspokens from people as you're with them. And maybe you could share a little bit about that process and how that works for you.
Correct. So there's a lot of things you cannot talk about as a real estate agent with your client. So it's always important to be a good listener, because as you're asking questions about, what specifically they're looking for in their home, it's kind of the same thing that we did, as I was explaining to you earlier, when my kids were in high school and we were moving all the time, we would church shop. So it was basically the same type of thing as which church felt like home, which church felt welcoming to us, which church felt comfortable, which church fed us, kind of like the same thing in a house. So I think that was something very important to me, to be able to help others go through that if they've never done that before.
What juicy tidbits can you give us, like trends in real estate in the last 5 years locally? This is just for my own interest. What do you see people looking for right now in a home?
In a home.
And then we could talk churches later.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I think in a home, a lot of people are looking for something that they are comfortable with, where they can find inspiration by looking outside, or being outside to get exercise close by. I'm trying to think. And obviously, since we live in the lake region, people want to be able to either get to the lake, or some people are really interested in good restaurants. So it really depends on what people are looking for. For example, when we were looking for a house, the big deal for me after coming from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was I wanted a grocery store less than an hour away. So that was a major deal for me. That was a deal breaker that would not have gotten unnoticed. So, yeah.
Now you have 3, right?
And so now I have quite
drive,
a few. I have
at
quite a
least.
few that I can go to. So that makes me very happy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Jeremy, I was curious, when you were looking for a home, you and Anne, what were the things that you looked for as you stepped into your own housing search?
I think biggest thing for us was location. We were in Charlotte in a townhouse. So part of it was a move for more square footage, just because we needed more space. But I was at church a whole lot more than Anne was at her job. So we needed somewhere that was closer to Bethel. And so that's what led us to moving to Cornelius. But knowing, hopefully kids are on the way, school district was one that we went ahead and looked for, with Huff and Bailey and those schools. Yep. The Kemp family.
We're in the same region.
Are in that same, school district. But go ahead and looking at that. I think if we had looked back, we'd have probably been a little bit even closer to church. And I don't know, you may hear us move here soon. Who knows if the right thing comes on the market. I think we know who to talk to.
For sure.
But anyways, for us, but it sounds to me like it's a lot of personal, and it seems to be personal to different people, right? If you don't have kids, you're not looking at a school district, right? Most people aren't looking for a grocery store close by, but that could hit. There could be plenty of people that does hit. So it's interesting how, and I think when you talk about church shopping, we probably don't, we get a little uncomfortable maybe with that term, but it kind of is what happens, right? People who are
who
shopping
move a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, yeah.
But it's deeply personal and in different ways. And in the case of what you were talking about, you can't always, you don't always have the ability to ask or know. So you're having to ask the right questions to get that kind of information out. And I think us as a church, we have to know when someone comes in the door that we have to know the questions to ask to kind of see exactly, do they have a kid? Okay, they need a good children's program. Well, we've got a great children's program, right? So that we can hit that. Or if they don't have kids, then we're not going to sell Miss Jan, right? So, but that's a parallel that I see between helping someone find a house and people looking for churches and trying to help them.
Right.
Well, and part of the Bethel story, as I understand it, is when the lake came up, which I hear is a term here. When the lake came up, Bethel had a real heart for the lake people, meaning not the people who'd been here forever, but the people who had come to live on the lake. And so there was this outreach to the lake crowd. And so that's part of who helped infuse a culture here of welcoming to that community, which I just think it's an interesting tie into the conversation, and knowing Bethel's story is helpful. And as we think about this next generation of being the church here in Cornelius and reaching out, who's our new lake people? Like who's moving here, Amy? That's a question I didn't put on the list, but where are people coming from, and where can Bethel get our heads around who our community is?
Well, anytime we talk to new buyers, I always tell them that the great part about Cornelius and Mooresville and Huntersville and Davidson is that a lot of people are not from this area. So they're a lot more friendly than you probably would find in New Jersey, because most people might have been in that area for a long time, so they're comfortable with their usual friends. They're not looking at trying to make new friends. But I think that that's something that that's what drew us to Bethel, was that people came and invited us to different things, and we found a life group and we found our family. So I think that that's a great thing to understand and kind of communicate without really communicating to people, is because sometimes they'll ask us what we do. And so, we'll tell them that we volunteer at church. And so that isn't really giving too much specifics. But then if they ask us a question, then we can answer the question from their questions.
Okay, so that you can speak as an agent to their questions of you.
Yes.
You just can't.
I can't introduce
them.
it. Yeah.
Yes, interesting. As somebody who was a recipient of the Petrenko's real estate services when we relocated here, I felt like your job was truly ministry to our family. And you saw us in some really great moments. You saw probably my children go through various stages of fatigue as we were looking at homes. You probably saw me more than Randy. Randy is not quite as emotional as perhaps I can be, but I know you saw me hit some rock bottom from time to time. So I really see this, felt like ministry to me. How do you see your work as ministry?
So I do see it as ministry. I also sometimes see it as marital counseling. And so the good news for us is that Vic and I don't see things the same way. So he brings a different perspective in than I do, which is probably good for our clients, because we absolutely don't see the same thing the same way. And so it's always good to kind of tell him it's okay to not agree. And he always volunteers that we got my house, not his. So I think that that's okay to share, is that sometimes there has to be negotiations.
That diffuses the whole.
It kind of makes him laugh that we got my house, not his. So it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because you talk about premarital counseling or marital counseling to some degree, right? But like a lot of times there are like real life applications to what we learn right within the church. And I think like just loving on people, and when you do see someone in a very emotional state, maybe, right?
A train wreck? Totally was.
Sure. I do think those are times where we don't even like it. We don't have to come out and go, hey, I've got this. I'm a Christian. God's on my side, right? It's just being like, oh, I'm going to be this friendly face who can kind of calm things down, and like we can love on people without just having to like, and you'll hear me talk about that a lot. It's the simple things, but I do think it's what we learn or know that we're called to do as Christians. And that's a prime example of like, hey, people are really emotional states sometimes looking at houses, and they don't always see the eye to eye, but how do
if they've missed a lot of opportunities because they didn't get the contract, sometimes that's been kind of a sad situation where they're like, well, but we've realized and can communicate to others that you might miss one, but maybe there's a better deal. There's another one on the horizon. So I think that kind of goes back to the Christian philosophy that God has a plan. Even though we can't say that, we can model it and shine a little bit into other people's lives.
And that's a great thing too. It's like you're in a role where you want to live as a Christian, but can't necessarily say that you're a Christian.
Right.
Some of us don't have that issue, right? We live it day to day, day in and day out, 24/7. But others can't always. I'm sure there's some corporate places that you're not allowed to express certain beliefs or views. So that's an interesting piece to think about, is while it's easy for some of us to connect with our neighbors and friends and what we do and what our job is, not all of us have that luxury of being able to just come out and say, oh, I'm a Christian and this is what it means.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you have a story, and probably there's confidentiality stuff, but is there a story that really sticks out to you where you saw your work as like, this was a God-ordained moment for me or for Vic, whatever that was, where you really sensed that his leading was part of the bigger story?
So the God-ordained, I've talked to several, during the COVID times, I've talked to several people who were in the process of getting divorced because they'd either spent a little bit too much time with their spouse in the house. Mm-hmm. And it's been, just trying to encourage them that, you just got to try to see that there will be another door opening, has been interesting. I mean, it reminded me a little bit of, since we lived in the Muslim country, obviously we were told absolutely do not ever talk about your faith, but a lot of times they would ask us about our faith. So that has been kind of an interesting thing is as you're modeling kindness, people will often ask you, what is your experience? So then you can share some of your unique experiences. And that's what we've kind of done. And I think that it's kind of just happened over the last 10, 15 years that we've been able to keep doing that.
Because people are looking, I don't know, I certainly look to others and go, am I okay? And I look to you to go, okay, if they're going through this or if they've been here, then I'm okay. And you don't always realize that people are doing that with you.
Right.
For sure, as real estate agents, so, as pastors, I'm sure people put that on us. Not that you always should, but that idea of, okay, if you've been through this or if you can give me that word, then Right.
It just helps to calm the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
go ahead.
I was to say, you're responsive. Like if someone comes up and says, hey, what's your religious background? Like you can, at that point, you can answer those questions if they're asked. You just can't offer them up. Or do you still kind of have to shy away?
I still try to be very cautious about different situations, especially while we're in the middle of a transaction, because that could be considered not proper. So I have to be very careful. But I try to always be kind. I always try to show respect. I always try to listen to others. And so it's been interesting after the transaction how then the conversations can happen. So it's interesting for me.
Well, and I feel like that's a turn, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but like the idea of looking at someone being kind and someone being loving and caring and respectful, like that just to me in the past used to be a given. Like everyone was that way. But now the fact that immediately in someone's mind signal, because as I think society, we're so bad at it, but that automatically points to us having some form of religious background, right? That seems to me that it's been a shift here probably in the last 5 or 10 years of, hey, everyone's not acting like this. And I think it's even more of a reason why we as Christians, in whatever our context is, whether it's in the church, out of the church, at our jobs, at our kids' ball games, travel teams, right? Whatever it is, right? Modeling some of these behaviors really sets us apart, and we stand out.
Which is a lot about what we've been talking about in Colossians about, okay, if Christ is in us, then there should be evidence of his presence in us. And we realize that it's both a reality and a journey, right? It started in us with our saying we're following, but this process of becoming is happening daily. Takes some practice on our part and some Holy Spirit wisdom. I want to close today with maybe a discussion where we pivot a little bit to the church, that Christ lives in us, being that picture, modeling as a community of people who are kind, respectful, loving, that you see some Jesus in us. And so when people come into our home, big home, and you alluded to the church shopping process with our earlier conversation, I guess, what do we want Bethel to represent, or what do we feel like the selling points here are? Not that we're trying to sell our church right now, but what are those traits that we want people to see when they come here? Because I think that'll give a flavor when people walk in the door.
Right.
And I realize this is a COVID time, so we're talking hypothetically at the moment. Nobody's in the doors yet, but let's end maybe on that with steps to making Bethel your home.
So I would say some of the things that jumped out for us was friendly smiles and somebody coming up to us to say hello. So I think that as a church, it is very important that you have some people who know who the regulars are and who the not regulars are, so that you can go up and say hello to them, because that can make a huge difference, because we've been to many other churches that never happened. And so I just think that that's one of the most important things is to say hello.
Well, and I've lived this a couple of times here. When you don't be the person that walks up to someone and says, "We are so glad that you've come today for the first time," and they've been a Bethel member for 50 years. You just haven't run into them in your time here.
Right.
So let's make sure we don't do that.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's...
So the way I work that is, I know, I'm not sure if I've met you before.
Thank you for that phrase.
Because,
Helpful phrase.
Because I might have met you and I just don't remember, or maybe I've met you and with the COVID mask, I don't recognize you that way. So I try to give myself an out.
And as we all step back in, we can use that phrase,
right?
Because it's been a while since we've seen each other. We're speaking prophetically to the future that is coming.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. What about you, Jeremy?
No, I think it starts at being super friendly, and I think there's some subconscious things maybe that we do, like we go to our pockets of people and have those when we can be in the building, kind of fellowship points and times, and we don't often look beyond our little circle that we're talking in and recognize those new folks that are coming in. So that's where I'm kind of like, okay, while we're in our group, maybe we are discussing, but maybe I'm looking over so-and-so's shoulder and seeing, oh, there's someone I don't recognize. Hey, I'll come right back. Let me go, say hey and greet, and not to smother though, because they're the Anns, and she won't mind me saying this. They're the Anns who are the introverts of the world that are like, I want to come in and leave without you even knowing that I was here. Right. So if you're going to notice me, at least just only say hi and then move on with life. Don't make me tell you my life story. Right. There's a balance between the two.
Too much.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. What about you, Karis?
Well, a phrase I often throw out at being involved in music is that everybody has their soundtrack, right? We all have different soundtracks that we grew up with. And I think a lot of times people come in to a church service and maybe it's a young couple in their 20s or 30s, and they come to maybe the traditional service and they walk in and immediately feel like, you know what, this is not my soundtrack, or it is my soundtrack because this reminds me of singing great hymns, or, hey, I need something with drums. And so I think to give permission to everybody to say, it's good that you have your soundtrack. How can we serve you? How can we serve you in that? Because, and help each other find that place. And even to be able to talk about that without I know there's always tension around music, but I guess to talk about it in a way that's really permitting, to say, hey, I would love to see this because this is my soundtrack and this is what speaks to me. And it'd be okay to have different soundtracks for different groups. So I would say that's one thing. And by soundtrack, I mean worship style. If you're a band K-Love listener, you would resonate with the Worship Cafe music. If you are, if you grew up on the great hymns, you would appreciate what happens in the traditional worship. And to say, hey, we're a place that we can offer both is pretty cool. Not all churches can offer both, and how cool that we get to here. So I would say, as I'm thinking about more of the detailed stuff, that's something that comes to mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have so much to offer, not just worship styles or different types, but different groups. And to try to find what somebody's looking for, right? Right. Taking it back to the house, right? You have to find exactly what they're looking for. And sometimes it's not possible. Right. And maybe at Bethel, sometimes maybe we don't have what you need, and XYZ church down the street may be a better option for you. But we want to attempt to be all things to all people if possible, and we want to do them well.
Very Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
Right,
yes.
Right.
Absolutely. And
mainly we want Christ to be known in this place. And I think when the fragrance of Christ shows up, it's the most attractive thing. We all have bought into that. To represent him well. Yeah. In whatever style, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this has been helpful. If you've got a vocation that you find yourself intersecting with your relationship with Christ, or that kind of faith works thing, reach out to us. We're going to broaden the scope to much more than just realty. Although it's a cool place to start. So let us know if you might want to be a guest, because we're always looking for great folks, right?
Or we'll just come pester you and ask you to be on.
Too. Yep. Tap,
Thanks,
tap,
Amy,
tap on the shoulder.
for being here. We really appreciate it. And
thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we will be back again next week. These are weekly podcasts, so check us out. Obviously, episode number 7 is coming. and we can't wait to bring it to you. And is it next week that Dr. Boone is back, Reverend Dr. Boone, or is it 2 weeks?
Might be 2 weeks.
Okay, so you've got a couple more weeks before Tom comes back to join the set, but we expectantly wait that time. But until then, you get us. So,
And that's a good thing.
it is.
We'll see ya.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining in.